I need a little more light here, do you think?
No, you're perfect.
Okay.
But I mean, you're in a newsroom. You look.
Actually, I went up to a conference room where I thought it'd be a little quieter. So, yeah.
So somebody wouldn't come running up and saying, "Mr. Gianola, there's breaking news. You can't talk to that doofus in Central Oregon anymore."
I'll be like, what? What? Oh, I mean, I'm going to loosen the tie though.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
kick back.
And so you're golfing a lot?
Trying to.
Gosh, I wish I could do that.
Kayaking, hiking.
Oh, that is awesome. I'm jealous of you.
Oh.
I still got one. My youngest is a senior in high school, so I'm still working it.
Yeah, when you start that second round of kids, that kind of that kind of delays the retirement options.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
delays the retirement quite a bit. Yeah.
Hey, well, welcome to the good old days of Portland media. Congratulations that you cross all lines of the good old days, the real good old days and the days you're in now.
Yeah. I don't know which are the good old days now or back then. It's just amazing how fast everything changes.
Yeah.
And I think now you've got to be really careful not to dwell on the good old days, because while they were good old days, they're old days, and you have to kind of keep looking forward. Look through the windshield, not the rearview mirror. So you don't want to get too reminiscent, I think, about the good old days and say, well, I wish we could have. Then you sound like the old guy on the rocking chair on the fire. Well, my day, we never would have done that on the air. You don't want to do that, but you just kind of have to grab those new challenges and go for it, man. It's a lot of new challenges.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because a lot of the people that I talk to are like me, out of the business, and boy, we talk about the business, we talk about journalism, and almost to a person, they all say, boy, I wouldn't want to be doing it now. Partly because of the political divide, and partly because of the pressures of social media. When I started, the deadline was 5 o'clock, and now the deadline is right now. You talk about challenges. You have navigated those challenges where you're still existing strong in this new thing that some of us are afraid to even touch.
Well, I'm not probably as swift with social media as I should be, but I really have a philosophy about it, Carl. And maybe it was just the way I was brought up. But I always tell the young reporters, tweet less, think more. Good. You don't want to be so obsessed. And what I don't like to see is when the reporters get so obsessed with their Twitter feed. I mean, I've had reporters and anchors when I'm out on the set, they're busy. We're in the middle of this newscast, they're taking selfies out on the set. Like, my fans need to see me now. And I'm kind of old school. I'm like, whatever you're doing, you need to be 110% present. You can't be on a news set and at the same time, I think, tweeting your latest selfie or whatever. You've got to be present. So I always tell them, stay on top of your social media. And I'm probably not as swift as you are, but always think about tweeting less and thinking more,
That's a great philosophy. I like it.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I understand that, the selfie thing is, hey, there's Jeff, and we're going to be on the air with my story that's very important for you to see, to try to attract people there. That's the new way of promotion. But boy, if you're not 100% into the presentation and the accuracy and all that kind of stuff, it's not going to be worth the tweet you sent out.
Exactly. That's so, and there's just a lot to concentrate on now in a newscast. You got to be here, you got to be standing over at that wall, so you're worried about the technical things and really connecting to what you're about to report on. I've already gone over the show. I've changed a lot of what's there, but I think you have to be present in what you're doing. And I think it's hard to do with social media and stuff, where everyone's trying to do everything at once. You end up not doing anything well. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
And interesting that you mentioned that, Jeff, because I got a little bit before I left. But I mean, your first newscast anchoring, 38, 40 years ago, you sat at a desk and you maybe had 2 cameras to look at. Now it's go stand in front of that wall, go stand on a 2-shot in front of this monitor, and walk back to the desk while you're reading a VO.
Yeah. But, Carl, I always thought I was very lucky. I grew up in San Diego and I had a paper route. And one of my last stop was a television station called KGTV in San Diego, which is an ABC affiliate now. I think then they were NBC. I'm not sure. And they had a cafeteria with an ice cream machine. So I'd always go in there, you know, and get an ice cream sandwich. But then I would go watch the newscasts. And that's where I decided that's what I was going to do.
Nice.
And I came from a pretty poor family, a big family, pretty poor. So I ended up going to junior college, but was doing an internship at a television station, that same station, KGTV. And as I was working there, eventually I did every job. I started out gripping, which was then carrying the recorder for the cameraman out in the field. But how lucky was that? I got to carry that recorder, watch how the cameraman worked, and watched how that reporter worked. And I worked with all of them down there. And then I was in the newsroom as an assignment editor and a news writer, eventually a producer, and then took a cut in pay to go to Santa Barbara, where I started my on-air work as a reporter. And then I started doing everything, filled in for weather, did this and that. But when I was in Santa Barbara, Reagan was president. So Reagan was in Santa Barbara at his ranch all the time. So the White House press corps was always in Santa Barbara. So now I'm rubbing elbows with Helen Thomas and Sam Donaldson. And, you know, I was just always lucky that I seemed to be at the right place at the right time. And then came to KATU here in Portland in 1983. And part of that was not only could I report, but I could also do weather, and I could also they could almost put me in any slot. And that was those were good skills to have, I think, you know.
Yeah, being well-rounded.
You were kind of like that in your career. You could always do a lot of different things.
Well, I started in sports.
Right, I remember.
And I guess sports is where I kind of got my anchoring practice, because when you know, Scott Leonard, Joe Becker, when they were off, I'd be anchoring the weekend. So I learned how to write a script that could be read on the air and read it on the air. And then one day when I had switched to news, they were saying, "Hey, anybody come in and to do the weekends this weekend?" I said,
"Yeah,
I will."
Yeah. And yeah, I think, and weather was the same thing. Remember, you're doing weather without a script.
Yeah.
So you're thinking on your feet. And then, you know, eventually Channel 2 liked me so much in weather, they made me the full-time weather person at 6 and 11. Eventually, so I was working with Bosley, the legendary Jim Bosley, who I just adored.
Yeah.
You know, the funniest man. If there was ever a personality, I don't think there's ever been a bigger television personality than Bosley. Hello, my friends, how are you? You know, he was bigger than life. And really, I looked up to him. There was such a gentle side to him.
Right.
And I loved that. But that's where I introduced that Bob the Weather Cat, who was actually named Hank, who was Bob Foster was the cameraman. You know Bob.
Yeah, I worked with Bob, sure.
And he had a cat named Hank. And one day he comes to me and says, "I got this cat. I put him in a funny outfit, and maybe you could use him in the." I go, "Yeah." Then I started saying, "Yeah, let's use him every Friday." But when I went on the air the first time, I couldn't remember the cat's name. And I, of course, remember I said, "Here's Bob the Weather Cat." Started doing that every Friday. That became huge, just huge. It was in People magazine. It was in, you know, and you look back on it now and it kind of looks stupid. But back then it just captured everyone's attention. And this is before social media. You know, you're just doing this on TV.
And if you ever left Bob the Weather Cat out of Fridays, you probably heard about it.
Well, you heard about it. And then when they moved me to the anchor desk, David Apple, who's no longer with us either, he refused to, he wasn't going to run the cat. So he didn't do it one Friday. And I said, "David, you're going to get thousands of calls." And sure enough, and after that, he continued the tradition. And then Bob died, and Bob Foster put together a half-hour show on Bob. And the last scene is an image of Bob the Weather Cat floating up to heaven. And that, I still think, holds the record for the highest rated, back then how they did ratings, local show. That was huge. People watched that. And today, crying. You saw Bob go to heaven.
Today it'd be online and it'd have 5 million hits.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. But back then, you know, that was, so those are the good old days.
Yeah,
it was just plain old TV. Yeah.
Yeah, your Bob the Weather Cat was kind of the same as Dave Selesky's Weekend Ho. I don't know if you remember, every Friday at the end, He would go head them up, move them out, weekend ho. And if we left that sucker out, I think some news director came in and said, forget that, stop doing that.
Yeah, they always do that.
And 2 weeks later, it was back in.
Yeah, I mean, it was, there was, those little things I think viewers really used to look forward to, those little bits like that you could do with weather. But I went into that anchoring and then just kind of never looked back, was paired with Julie Emery. And then Julie and I kind of grew up on the air together. And I know you've talked with her and we just kind of went from there. And then, so
yeah, the chemistry is, chemistry is something you can't invent. It's probably sometimes accidental. I always felt that I was lucky enough that the people that I anchored with was that way, but because you can tell when the chemistry is not there and it doesn't work.
Exactly. You just sense it. You know what I always tell people, if you want to know if two anchors get along, watch their newscast without the sound turned on, because 80% of what viewers see is body language.
Yeah.
It really is. And if you see an anchor standing like this, and if you see me, maybe I take it too much the other way because I kind of sometimes get relaxed, but I'm, not in these COVID days, but I would be touching anchors. I'd be moving over there and but I also have a philosophy, and I think this always helped me, that I'm only as good as the people I'm surrounded with.
No kidding.
If I'm trying to be, and you and I know the anchors who were all in it, they were just concentrating on themselves and weren't there, and they're not real successful. It's the ones that, if you're on the set with me, I'm gonna help Carl. I'm gonna let you kind of make fun of me, and I'm gonna, because I like you, and we're gonna get, but viewers can tell when you don't like each other. They can tell that if it's genuine or not.
You bet. And that's that chemistry thing, and it comes. Well, I think it comes naturally to people who are good at their jobs and good people and can get along. But you and Julie certainly had that, and took it together to KOIN a few years later. But a couple things at K2, you were a longtime host of Town Hall, which is an important part of Portland TV history for years and years and years. I'm away, so I'm not sure if Steve Dunn's still doing it now. Not as often.
No, they canceled that show years ago.
But once a week there was an issue. There were people on both sides, and there was a moderator, and it was you. And that is not an easy job. It
was a tough job, and how I got that job was, Jack Faust hosted it for years.
Right.
The show started in 1976.
I remember.
And he hosted it for years, and then he was also an advisor to Bob Packwood, the senator. When Bob Packwood got in trouble, Jack kind of said, we've got some town halls coming up on Bob Packwood. I can't really do those because,
conflict of interest.
I have an interest. Yeah. And so they had me fill in, and I filled in a little bit. And then Jack decided he was just, he had done it long enough. And he and I had some great talks, but I was so afraid about filling in those shoes. Jack used to sit in a chair and spin around like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't going to do that. I needed to do something different. So I just stood with the mic and walked around, and I filled in for a few shows. And then I was in the middle of contract talks at the time. I think it was a 5-year contract. And they said, do you, and my attorney who was handling it, I've never had an agent, I always had a local attorney. And he said, do you want Jeff to continue with Town Hall? And they said, no, we're getting another host. So no sooner did I sign the contract, then they literally laughed at me and said, your contract's inclusive, you're doing Town Hall. And I thought, oh my gosh, because sometimes that was live on Sunday a lot. That was a 6-day work week.
Right.
And I was thinking, 5 years? And, but later I just decided I'm going to do the best job I can with it. And I thought I did a pretty good job with it. We had some great town halls, including some remote locations where we did one at a juvenile detention camp out in Tillamook that I thought was a great story. And we did some, Frank Munjum, who was the producer. They did a great job. There's always a great supporting cast there. But Town Hall was such an important part of local television. And when they let that go, when I left K2 in 1998, Steve Dunn did it for a while, and then they kind of just took it off the air.
Instead of become weekly, it became like quarterly,
and
or
then
something
it kind
like
of just disappeared, and
But
Yeah.
that's a great challenge that you took on and did such a great job of. I mean, because the issues were always important. The
Yeah.
people, everybody had something to say.
Yes.
You had to keep it
Balance
balanced.
it out.
You had to keep it controlled. The times that I saw Town Hall with you and with Jack Faust, it was just an important show for the Portland
It
market to
was.
have. It was a treasure.
You want to hear the funniest story about Town Hall?
Please,
So
that's why we're
we
here.
we always did once a year a town hall on UFOs for some reason,
No
because it
way.
really, or something like that, something like, and it was a fascinating show, like a guy that worked in a Forest Service fire outlook that didn't believe in him, but one night something weird happened. He told his story and stuff. Well, we had a live crew out in Naha, Oregon, where apparently some of these UFOs had been landing and they would leave burn marks behind and then they'd take off. So we had, I switched double box, so they're live there. I go, let's go now live to Naha, where residents there have reported seeing UFOs and they've left, burn marks on the ground. I'm joined by Bill Smith or whoever it was. And there was this big guy and he's just every, hi, Jeff, glad to meet you. And I said, yeah, Bill, now tell us about what you said. Well, the lights was a whirling and they was going down and we see it. And then it took off and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, and I understand it left something behind, wanting him to get into the burn marks. He goes, well, I don't know what it left behind, but I know what I left. Now, this is live on a Sunday. I know what I left behind. I earned my pants. I mean, he says it on the air. There's this pause for a minute, and everyone starts laughing at the thing and the thing. And I just said, well, that's live TV. We take a quick break and we come back. But, for that show, they sent me down to Roswell, New Mexico. And I did a whole thing down there. And those kind of shows, we always did if an election was coming up. Right now, what kind of shows would we be doing? We'd be doing things about Portland, the trash, the homeless,
right,
the protests. We would probably be doing a whole series. But every once in a while, we had room to throw in those kind of weird shows like UFOs and these people that were excellent with coupons. They could live on $5 a month by coupon shopping. But those were just kind of what I called sort of fun shows that drew huge interest. Right. So it was a challenge to do that show, but man, did that shape me and really hone my skills on interviewing and some other things,
And then how long did you co-host AM Northwest?
AM Northwest, I was just a fill-in on there, and they always, in a ratings period, would have sometimes Steve Dunn and I do it for a week to kind of boost the ratings and do some other stuff. But I was just a fill-on that. Where I really started was on the old 2 at 4 show, which was an afternoon show at 4 o'clock with Margie Boulay, who was a great talent, and Paul Lindman. And I was sort of the news guy there. And then they started kind of using me in that show. So I was never the full-time host on either of those shows, but they used me a lot on those shows. So at one time, KATU, when I worked there, was doing the most live programming of any station in the country. Live audience, imagine this, live audience for AM Northwest, live audience at 4 for 2 at 4. These audiences be coming in. We had Faces and Places, which was kind of like a People magazine type show, back then. And that was Mary Sterrett and
Ron Carlson,
Ron, and they were live. We would toss to them from the 6:30 set at 7 o'clock. I mean, it was such an exciting place to be because it was just always happening, back then.
Well, and that's why we get into local TV. I mean, I loved. I went from 8 to 2 so I could host AM Northwest, but I loved, we did a live show with the Portland Marathon, and we did a live coverage of the races at PIR, and that's what made the connections between KGW and the city and KATU and KOIN, and even the radio stations like KGW AM and KISS. There was connection there when we did that kind of stuff, and that's local TV and that's Portland TV. Good old days.
Yeah. And I don't think you find that same connection now. There's things we do, but in social media connects with people, it absolutely does. But that really connected on such a great level back then when there was no social media. It really did.
Yeah.
That was really the only social connection was radio or TV locally.
Think back some of the bigger stories of the time. You know, you and I both got there after Mount St. Helens, but
Yeah,
you know, the flood of '96.
flood of
I
'96.
mean,
That,
because that was like a week-long event. We knew it was coming,
yeah.
and we were on the air forever.
It seems like we were on the air for like 2 weeks, and I remember sleeping at the station, just like it was just nonstop. And the visual elements from that, I mean, it was like incredible. I remember in Lake Oswego, a dock broke off near the Rams pub or something that there. And I kept telling our crews, I said, it broke off. I go, give it about a half hour, so it's going to come floating by downtown Portland. And then sure enough, here it came. And we had predicted that, you know, here it came. But that was just so, and remember the people gathered to build the seawall under Vera Katz,
Yeah.
asking people to come down and build, you know, the plywood walls. And we hadn't seen that since 1964 when there were the Christmas floods then.
Yeah.
Portland.
I was live down there. I'd done the morning news with Brenda in the morning. We got off at noon, then they sent me down there. I was on the air from 4 a.m. till 8 or 9 o'clock down there at that seawall.
Oh, it was, but yeah, I think if you were to ask me one of the bigger stories, I always tell people, I think it was the '96 floods. I mean, there's been so many things. I mean, just
Springfield, think about the Thurston High School shooting. Yeah.
That was pretty bad.
The new Carissa.
The new Carissa, which somehow everyone, you know, because they couldn't sink the ding thing, you know, and remember that. And I was here then, and that great Mike Donahue was our reporter down there, you know, our anchor reporter there. And Mike did such a fabulous job covering the new Carissa. And then after a while, viewers got tired of it because we were constantly showing it every day. And they said, we see that new Carissa one more time. But it became not funny, but it kind of did, because remember, they tried everything to sink it and they couldn't sink it.
And then it floated back.
It floated back. And it was a story that wouldn't die, you know? And so there were so many. Keiko flying away.
Oh, Keiko, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Keiko, and then when he went, people were crying, and you know, and there's just so many stories, you know, that it's hard to put one, but the floods were definitely up there, I think. Yeah.
So that's that. You know, those were the good old days, because now, unfortunately, it's the graffiti, it's the protest,
Yeah,
it's the unfortunate homeless situation.
Yeah.
You know, you're still there. I got out of town. It has got to be I mean, those stories go forever and ever and ever. How do you keep covering them without just you know, grinding it into the ground?
Well, you know, I'm kind of in the forefront in that, I think, with anchors. You know, a few years ago, I did the Unsheltered Truth, where I followed 5 homeless people around for 3 months. I shot most of that story with my iPad. Now, keep in mind, I'm putting the story together as I'm anchoring all the newscasts. So when I do that, I mean, I have to psych myself up, because I'm in for 15-hour days, most weekends, you know, but I thought that story was good. And then just last spring, I did Is Portland Over? And then I included some of our other reporters in that, taking various elements. But the response to that story I first did, which, you know, where I put the mayor on the hot seat saying, you know, what are you doing exactly here? I mean, you know, how can you assure the people of Portland that they're safe when it comes to what's happened with the police, when it's come to what's happened with it? And where is the sense of urgency to fix the problem? It's sort of like Portland decided to lose a sense of urgency. I've also done stories, and I'm about to reprise this, on Portland's has the most, people don't realize this, most antiquated form of city government in the entire country for a large city. We have that commission style government, which doesn't work, which really doesn't work when there's a crisis or crises like we had. And you saw that happen. No other city, well, we don't elect city council people by district. So Carl, if you were running, let's say we changed it like other cities, and you were District 1, which represented Northeast Portland, and there was a bunch of trash and homeless in Laurelhurst Park. I'm not saying that problem would go away, but with you living there and being accountable to your constituents from that district, it wouldn't be near as bad. But right now we elect people citywide, and even the mayor told me there's no accountability under this system, because they don't, you know, they're not accountable to everyone. It's why we've ignored East County here in Portland for so long. We really do. There is an effort to change that form of government. And just speaking as a citizen, until Portland does that, it doesn't matter who's mayor. There's no, it's not going to work. You know, we got to change that.
And you think about, it's an opinion that it doesn't work, and that may be the correct analysis of it. And I'm sure if you got to people that know more than you and I do about city government and civics, to try to change something like that in Portland or in Oregon is very, very hard. I mean,
it's very hard.
I mean, you can't pump your own gas in this state just because that's the way we've done it.
Exactly.
And you can't, we can't change. We can't have a sales tax in Oregon because we don't do that, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you have all these visitors coming to town from other states that
exactly.
So those kind of things can be analyzed, and we know that there's a better way to do things, but that change is really hard.
It's hard. There's a move you have to change the city charter, and then it has to go up for a vote. And most people really don't get into the nuts and bolts of city government. And they said, well, Portland runs fine.
Yeah.
But if they knew what other people know from around the country, city experts, they'd say, no, Portland, that form of government, the commission style of government, has to go. Galveston is where the commission form of government started, and they got rid of it in 1948 because it was so antiquated. So that tells you how far behind Portland is.
Yeah.
So
it's nice to hear you say that, because I mean, that sounds like another special if it can, or a town hall where
I've done some stories on that, and I think it's part of our series is Portland Over, taking another look at it.
Yeah.
You know,
you also, when you were at KATU before you moved to KOIN, were again at the forefront of the homeless issue. You spent a week or so on the street yourself.
Well, I think that was in 1986. So I'd only been in Portland 3 years or so. And that's when we had Baloney Joes. And the homeless problem was mainly men. There were no women and children like you see now. It was men. Alcohol was the problem. It wasn't drug. You had Baloney Joes, and you had a few other places, St. Francis Dining Hall, and you had some other places. And
Gospel Mission, yeah.
Gospel Mission, and I went on the street and lived there, and I worked with photographer Eddie Belmutis, and Norm Gunning was the assignment editor, and we were the only ones that knew I was doing this, and they took video of me, and it was kind of a personal diary of what it was like to be homeless, and that really struck a chord with people. I mean, years later, people would come up to me and say, God, I remember that. And I know Jesuit high school for years used to have that as a video that they would show their religion in their religion classes and stuff, and show that. And I still get people saying, yeah, I remember when you lived on the street. I brought a little bit of that video back for Unsheltered Truth that I did 2 years ago. I started it by saying 30 years ago or 35 years ago, I lived on the streets of Portland, but I slept at Baloney Joe's. I slept outside. I did some other things, but it was never as dangerous as it is now, right, or as huge a problem as it is now, you know.
Right. And as a reporter, you could live on the street and learn, but you always knew you still had your job, you still had your home. When it was over, it was going to be over. For the people that you're examining, that's life uncertain out there.
And you know, it's there's no easy solution to that problem. But I did in Unsheltered Truth, I traveled to San Diego, and there's a guy there that it just so happened I had gone to high school with him, and he has a pretty good program that moves it. But he said, and I asked the mayor this in my story, he goes, the problem with Portland is you have confused compassion with tolerance. And he goes, you can't do that. And when I asked the mayor that, I thought he was going to dispute that. And the mayor said, he's absolutely right, we have. So the mayor is saying you sometimes have to take a stronger stance. It's not compassionate to let someone die on the street because they're shooting up, and you're saying, well, that's their thing, let's be tolerant about it. That's not right. That's not compassionate. You do have to take a stronger stand in that. You don't just say, well, let's leave them alone and they're living in filth and let's, that's their thing. No, that's not compassionate. You have to take a stronger hand in that. And so that's, I think, at the core of the problem. Anyway.
It will be interesting when somebody does a podcast 30 years from now and looks back at this at the good old days to see if we've solved that or come close.
Yeah.
I know one of your big projects over all these years, Jeff, has been the foster children.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
still doing Wednesday Child still?
Well, not with COVID. It just
Okay.
became, we were trying to, and it was like, no, the kid. But Carl, I've done that for 35 years, and there's a lot I don't tell people on the air, but uh, you wouldn't believe the emails I'll get, and one comes in at least once a month from someone who's a grown adult with families of their own. Jeff, do you remember me? I was your Wednesday kid there. And a lot of times I can find the video. That's what they're usually looking for.
Right.
And I've done a few where I've reunited with them and talked with them, including a woman who I took on a Disneyland trip with 5 other Wednesday kids when she was little. Now she has kids of her own. I think she's even a grandmother now, that one of the kids has a baby. And she tells me how that trip changed her life, how it was because someone saw it on the air and they adopted. Carl, I just have a story of a girl who was 13 or 14 when I featured her at Barnes and Noble at Bridgeport Village, and Marissa is her name. And she was wonderful when I did it. And there was a lot of response. A family saw that, adopted her. They had already had grown kids, adopted her. She fit right into that family. Well, and that was a few years ago. Well, at the start of the pandemic, I featured another girl about the same age, and we were at Gabriel Park wearing masks. And I brought my little dog Lucy along. And so, we had something to do. This girl, a former Wednesday kid who's been adopted, saw that. And to make a long story short, this Wednesday's child was adopted by this. She's now in that family again. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's all come full circle. That is probably the most rewarding thing that, when I'm long done with this, that will be, I've got some scrapbooks that you wouldn't believe, but I don't share those really with viewers. I kind of feel like we've intruded on these kids' lives anyway by kind of saying, and when they find a home, that's great. But I kind of don't want to intrude on their lives anymore. But my wife and I started a foundation for foster kids, and we used to have the party at my house, believe it or not. I used to live on some acreage, and we would have the party there, and other media people would come, and we would raise quite a bit of money. But we would use that for these foster kids for sports programs and things like that, and helping out foster families. And then a few years ago, we wrapped that up and gave the money to a similar organization that does that now. But when we first started, there was no one doing that. Mm-hmm. And then there were some other, I think John Canzano's foundation does a little bit of that.
Bald-faced truth.
And so I think that's great. And so now there's other people doing it, and we did our thing and we got it off the ground. And I would sometimes write about $20,000 worth of checks a month. I remember staying in the newsroom late at night writing these checks, and there's a lot of paperwork that goes with that. Right. And it was all volunteer. And after a while, we did our duty. There were other organizations and we wrapped that up. But that will be the most rewarding thing I think that I've done in my career, is that, I think.
Well, it's a great legacy, but it's also a great testament to the power of, again, local TV news and what we can do to help the community. For all the garbage we have to hear about, we're on this side, we're not on that side, and you're not covering this story right, and blah blah blah. Okay, you can criticize us, but that kind of stuff that you're doing, that John Canzano's doing, that all the promotional, the toy drives and stuff like that, that connection with the community is maybe just the one reason why we should be doing what we've done all these years.
Absolutely. You've said it exactly. And it's the one thing that keeps you going, because, you get off that set sometimes. It's like, oh, what did we just talk about? Murder, protests, cold case that they can't solve. The Blazers have lost, and you come off that set and you're like, okay, but when you can come off of that and then get an email from someone saying, Jeff, do you remember in 1992, I was your Wednesday's child and we played basketball. I just wanted to let you know, someone watched that story and they adopted me, and I have 2 kids now. And you're like, nice. Oh my gosh. And then you also think, what the hell happened to time? How old was I? So,
So
anyway.
I wanted to ask you, people know Jeff Gianola. They should. They knew Bosley. They know Paul Lindman. And Kathy Smith and Shirley Hancock and
Okay.
Kelly, all the people that we have done such a great job. How often do you get mistaken for somebody else?
Not very often. That does happen to a lot of people. Not very often. If I do, that they'll think Steve Dunn, even though
Right.
we don't look anything alike. But they remember kind of, I think, that I was on Channel 2,
Mhm.
and they remember that Steve and I anchored the 11 o'clock together with Rob Marciano and Ron Carlson, which was that 11 o'clock was something else in that day with all of us doing it. And I think sometimes if they do, it doesn't happen very often, but if they do, it's usually Steve Dunn. Hey, Steve. They'll call
Right.
me Steve. And then usually they correct themselves right away and say, oh, Jeff. But I'll tell you, the person I used to get mistaken for, there was a guy named Norm that used to be the general manager at the Multnomah Athletic Club. And I didn't think he looked anything like me, but people thought they did. And I would be either near the club or around there when someone would come up to me and start talking about the squash courts or what are we going to do about something. And I would sit there and look at him for a minute, and then I think, they think I'm Norm from the Multnomah Athletic Club. And I told this one guy, joking, and he didn't take it as a joke. I said, well, don't worry about the squash courts. We're getting rid of them and putting in a parking lot. I said that one time. Then I thought, I better call Norm and tell him
Norm's
I
in
said
trouble.
that. And he got a big kick out of it. But he and I used to always laugh because people would mistake him for me. So that was my doppelganger in town. And it was a guy that didn't even work in the media, you know?
Well, I asked that because I know it happens to some people. For me,
yeah.
I have been mistaken for you several times.
Really?
And I'll tell you a story here. A lot of people say, hey, the weather guy. And then I love the people who say, I love you. I watch you all the time on Channel 12. I never worked at Channel 12.
Channel 12. Yeah.
But this is my Jeff Gianola story. And I think I sent you an email about this.
You did. But tell the
Okay.
story. Yeah.
So my wife and I are heading to the eastern part of the state, and we stop in the Dalles for breakfast at the Country Kitchen. And you can tell when you walk in if people recognize you. And I could, I could tell that my wife and I both, they recognized me, and there were smiles, and we're getting treated a little differently, and it was kind of fun. And then different people came up to our table because they, that guy's out there that's on TV. And at the end, they somebody did come up and say, Mr. Gianola, it was really nice to have you here in the restaurant. And then I sent you the email, and I wanted you to know that happened. But then the tag was, and Jeff, I want you to know they love you at the Country Kitchen of the Dalles, but they think you're a really bad tipper.
Oh, yeah. No, you know what? It is funny. Do you find this when you traveled outside of Portland and you forget that, the stations here in Portland, people across Oregon watch it.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend used to say, the farther away we get from Portland, the bigger you are. That was such a big deal. And I'd love it if I go to Bend or I go to, people are just so gracious and they come up to me and, wow, can I take my picture with, and that's where it really hits you, that this impact that you're having, I'm really lucky because people, I'm pretty approachable, I think, on the air, and people feel that, I think, when I'm out, but they'll come right up to me and you ought to go to Home Depot with me sometime. They're coming up, I'm helping, and I get a big kick out of that. I just think how lucky I am. I know some media people that bothers them when people come up, and I suppose if I was eating or something, it might, but I just always remember Bosley told me, he said, be gracious to them. And he goes, and if you're with your wife, introduce your wife to these people so she doesn't feel left out, or your kids. But Bosley tells a funny story. He used to tell this of being at Jake's and eating with his lovely wife, Karen, at the time. And it was one of those tables where he was sitting like this, and the table was open, to the restaurant. And he goes, and sure enough, he says, I saw some guy sauntering up to my table, and he knew he was going to say hi. And he goes, I knew at the last minute, but he leaned on the table and the whole table flipped up and said, and there was Bosley and his wife sitting in the booth with all their food and their table, and the guy didn't stop the guy. He could walk. Bosley said he walked over the table and the broken dish and stuff, said, Bosley, Bill Smith, Tigers, glad to meet you, and Bosley's just like, Okay, so people will do that. I was just at a restaurant on Saturday, and a guy from Silverton came up to me and said, "I just want you to know, my wife and I, we watch you down in Silverton. We're in Portland." I mean, how nice is that for them to take? They don't want to interrupt you, but they don't want to leave without saying hi. And so that's, to me, that's really humbling. That's
Well,
that's
because
not a
you say hi to them every night,
exactly.
and
And
that's their chance to return the favor.
yeah, and to me, that's just such a compliment. And honestly, if they didn't do that, then you'd have something to worry about in our business.
Yeah, then
So
the Q
yeah,
factor would not be as high, and contract
yeah,
negotiations next week would not be great. Hey,
yeah.
Jeff, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and you got an 11 o'clock newscast to get ready for. And say hi to some friends of mine, like Dan Tilkin. I used to sit right
Oh
next
yeah,
to Dan. What a great reporter.
oh
And
yeah.
and Rich Kerr is still your news director, right?
Rich is our news director. And did you work with him at Channel 8?
Yeah. Rich and I worked a lot of years together. Talked a lot about Notre Dame football and all that kind of
Oh yeah,
stuff. And
I go in there and talk with him.
it's fun to
Poor
see him.
Rich.
It's fun to see him now with those little girls, because
That's what I was just going to say. Here's a guy that was a bachelor just a few years ago. Met this wonderful woman. They had a baby, got married, and within a few months now they had twin girls. So now he has 3 little girls. Oh, I was up and I looked at him the other and go, "Isn't it funny how life works out, Rich? Where were you 2 years ago?" So anyway,
well,
he's just
I always
happy.
liked having a news director that had a family,
Yes,
because then they understand
they
what all
understand when you
those
need that
people in the
time
newsroom.
off. Yeah, and that's what that Carl. That's what I always tell people. I go, "You want a news director, you're never going to get 100% what you want in a news director, but I said, you want one that understands family life and that things come up. So, because our business is so demanding, to get that. Well, I wish I could retire like you and play golf and have these fun conversations, but I'll be there pretty soon. I think.
Good for you. Good for you.
I'll be there pretty soon.
All
Yeah.
right, Jeff, this has been great. I appreciate your time, and
Oh,
continued
it's
good
my
success.
pleasure. It's always good to see you, and haven't talked to you in a long time. And I always tell you this, you're always one of my favorite people in the media. I always thought you were so dang funny, and was sad to see when you left, because I thought you had such a great, but you went on to other things. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking back at the good old days with all my friends, Jeff. So thank
I
you
love
very
that.
much. We
All
will
right.
see you down the road.
Okay, take care. Bye, Carl.